afternoon. Hello, Pittsburgh. Thank you so much for coming out on a beautiful Friday afternoon. I also want to thank everybody who's watching on the live stream. I know that we have people from around the nation that wanted to hear this national security discussion. So for those of you who don't know me, I was President Trump's spokesperson at the State Department, the face of America First foreign policy in his administration. Thank you. I'm also the host of the Morgan Ortagus Show on Sirius XM Patriot Channel, the only channel to listen to, 125 every Sunday, 11 to 1. You get to hear us talk about American national security and foreign policy. And what is Polaris? Well, we decided that national security issues, foreign policy, defense issues are so important that we are going around the country and bringing in special guests to have these conversations, both in person, but of course also online, as we are having people who are watching the live stream today. There's so much. I mean, listen, we're going to get to it all today. I also have some questions from all of you, so I'm going to moderate about half the discussion, and then we will get into your audience questions. So thank you so much for coming out on a Friday afternoon to discuss American national security and foreign policy. Without further ado, I'm going to bring on the stage my amazing panelists. First, from the great state of South Carolina, the senior senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham. Next, we have, from the great state of Florida, former Attorney General of Florida, Pam Bondi. Hi, Pam. And of course, we cannot forget the most important special guest that we have today, my dear friend. He's Army, not Navy, but we still love him for it, Dave McCormick. All right. Hi, Dave.
Hey, how are you?
Well, let's jump right into it. We're going to have this discussion. We do have some great audience questions. I'm going to start with you first, Dave. You obviously have a background in the military. You know, it's one of those inflection points in history whenever you can look at almost every theater around the world and find a new war, find something that's concerning, find a tragedy. So with that happening in every theater, what is most concerning about American national security right now to you?
Well, first of all, Morgan, thank you so much for hosting. Thank you for Polaris. Senator, thank you for coming to Pennsylvania. And Pam, thank you for being here. What a great lineup. We're lucky to have you here, so thank you all. You know, I think the thing that is most concerning to me is that our adversaries are not fearful of America right now. We've lost deterrence. It started under President Biden with the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, the humiliation of that. That was one of the inspirations for running last time. A very set of mixed signals that, in my opinion, gave Putin the thumbs up that you can go. Some of the mistakes that Biden made, the approval of Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the mishandling of the Chinese surveillance balloon, and then most recently, the inability to act decisively when our U.S. troops are being attacked in the Middle East. We've lost deterrence. Deterrence is like reputation. It's very hard to build, it's easy to lose, and once you lose it, it's hard to get back. And that's what's happened. The military capability, the will to use it, and uncertainty in the minds of our adversaries. So I think we're in a moment where we're being tested around the world, and I'm fearful that in this last window, before President Biden leaves office in November, which has to happen, we're going to be tested again. And so it's the perception of weakness in the minds of our adversaries that worries me most at this moment.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. You know, Senator Graham, there's so much to talk about around the world, but I want to talk about the Middle East because you have spent so much time in Congress working on Israel. You introduced things like the Taylor Forced Act. You've been one of the most pro-Israel members of the Senate. Where we are today, not only, I have to remind everybody, it's not only Israelis that were killed and were attacked on October 7th. We had 33 dead Americans, and we still have 5 Americans that are held hostage. In fact, I'm wearing a necklace that says in English and in Hebrew, "Bring them home now," given to me by one of the families that I visited with you in Israel in January. Give us an update, Senator Graham, on where you think we are with the conflict in the Middle East.
Well, a round of applause for Morgan. You know, this is a good deal. Thank you for doing this. We don't talk enough about this. Dave, best of luck. So where are we? Israel has its back against the wall. Do you agree with that, everybody? Israel's a friend, right? Not the enemy. Hamas is the bad guy. Israel's the good guy. And to all the people on these campuses, you're crazy. So here's what I think. I think Israel needs our help now more than ever. I think it started, like Dave said, with the withdrawing from Afghanistan. Why did they attack on October the 7th? Why did they video what they did? The Nazis tried to hide their war crimes and their inhumanity to man. Hamas videoed it, I think, to stop the effort by Saudi Arabia to recognize Israel. The biggest nightmare for the Iranians is for the Arabs and the Jews to get along together, move forward in peace. I've been working with Biden to do that. President Trump, you and Pompeo did the Abraham Accords where 6, 7 Arab nations recognized Israel. We had the Mideast going in a new direction. Biden pulls out of Afghanistan. This is her line. 21, Taliban take over, 2021. 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. 2023, Hamas attacks Israel. 2024, Iran attacks Israel. What about 25, 26, 27, 28? Let's do something about that. So the money that we sent to Israel yesterday will help them replenish Iron Dome. What did we learn? Iron Dome works. 300 drone attacks sent by the Ayatollah toward Israel, all of them intercepted. You had Arabs and the Americans working with Israel to shoot these things down, including missiles. So I am unequivocally in Israel's camp. The same people who want to destroy Israel want to kill you too. The Ayatollah, how many of you believe if he had a nuclear weapon, he'd use it? If you don't believe that, you shouldn't be allowed to drive in Pennsylvania or anywhere else. The guy's a religious Nazi. So Israel cannot allow him to get a nuclear weapon. That's what he's trying to do. All these proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, controlled by Iran. They're attacking Israel now to diminish the Jewish state. And you see worldwide opinion turning against Israel makes me sick to my stomach. But we're going to stick with Israel. President Trump was just terrific on Israel. He recognized Jerusalem's capital of Israel, the Golan Heights, which is strategically important. That's part of Israel. He got the Abraham Accords with you and Pompeo's help. So we're at a very tenuous time for the future of the Jewish state. Now's the time to be certain and clear. Now's the time to make sure they have the space to kill all of the Hamas attackers, make sure it never happens again, and try to find a way forward where Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Israel can work together not only to provide a better life for the Palestinians, but security for Israel.
You know, Pam, there's so much to ask you about being a former prosecutor for almost 20 years, plus an attorney general, but I want to actually just hone in on something we were discussing at lunch. Pam Bondi commended me for the Star of David necklace that I wear, and I said, I had this necklace for a while, but post October 7th, I said to myself, I'm not going to hide the fact that I'm Jewish. I can't stop anti-Semitism in this world, but I'm going to teach my daughter that you stand up for yourself and that you fight back. And thank you. So my daughter is only 3.5. She's got a little bit before college, Pam.
She's beautiful.
She's the smartest and prettiest thing ever, but I'm a little biased. But when I start to think about, and I'm already saving money for her to go to college. I'm still in the reserves, so she's going to get the GI Bill from me. But when I start to think about the university choices that I'm going to make for her, I have to think about where will she be safe? Where can she be openly Jewish and safely go to college? And it breaks my heart.
University of South Carolina.
University of Florida. I was going to say Florida.
But it breaks my heart that we in America have to think that way. And I just want you to expand a little bit on what you think can be done to safely protect our Jewish students on university campuses today.
Yeah, and what Morgan and I were talking about earlier too was, can you imagine being the parent of a Jewish child and you're scared to wear your Jewish star? You're scared to wear anything that identifies you, a yarmulke, anything that identifies you as being Jewish. Can you imagine sending your child to USC for 4 years only to know that the graduation's canceled? Canceled now. Because
Southern California, not South Carolina.
Yeah. But cancel because they have these well-organized, by the way, tent cities. Have you looked at these tents? They happen to look just alike, don't they, at all these campuses? These beautiful, colorful tents. You think that's pretty organized? And look at these kids. Half of them I don't think are even college students. I could vent all day on this, what they're doing. But to me, when you're, well, to anyone, when you're saying, I am Hamas, I don't care who you are, you're identifying with a known terrorist organization, right, Dave? I mean, then you are saying, I identify as a terrorist. I mean, these idiots, at best, they're idiots. They need to be removed from these campuses. They need to be kicked off by the police. That president of Colombia, she needs to be fired. She needs to be gone yesterday. But the police need the authority to do their jobs. And if you watch closely on the news, these aren't protesters, they're rioters. When our men and women in law enforcement are in their riot gear and they're having to stand there and take this trash, when you have these kids, if they're even students, pushing them in the shoulders, that's battery on a law enforcement officer, period. They need to be removed. At best, they need to be trespassed. And then if they come back, they have no right to be on those campuses. If they come back, they can be arrested. So to cancel a college graduation is showing them that they win. What's going to be next? We can't wear our crosses if we're Christians. I mean, what is coming next in this world if we don't stop them?
I think we just found President Trump's VP pick.
Oh.
Sorry. Dave, gosh, I want to stick to Israel, but we do have to get around the world, and I've got to talk to you specifically about China. You brought it up in your first answer, and there's so many different ways to talk about the threat from the Chinese Communist Party. You know, you have such an important financial background, so you'll potentially be an anomaly in Congress that you can read a ledger. But whenever we look at our defense budget and we look at things like the budget that we just presented this year, we had room for 2 attack submarines. We cut 1, right? And so you look at these foreign policy deals that the Biden administration done, which AUKUS with Australia, the United Kingdom, great deal, but we can't deliver on our subs. We have a recruitment crisis in our military. Is our military ready to fight China? God forbid if we have to do it. And are we doing the right things to deter them?
Yeah, I'm deeply worried about our military readiness. Part of it is what's going on in society, where less than a third of young people are deeply patriotic, and I think that's showing up in our recruitment numbers. We're not able to field the right next generation of young men and women for our armed services, which is a real tragedy. Part of that's also because the military has lost its way, in my opinion. The agenda around DEI and other things in our military has really taken priority over basic warfighting. The Army, of course, which I know the best, literally released its climate change strategy before it announced its warfighting strategy under President Biden. And that begins to deviate from the mission of the military is to kill the bad guys, kill the enemy. And by being the most lethal fighting force in the world, you deter the need to hopefully go to war. So you have to have that capability. The third thing I'm worried about is leadership. And if you were going to imagine the kind of transformation that needs to happen to take on China, the asymmetric warfare, which you all know quite well, I'm deeply worried that our budget is misallocated towards the past and not enough towards the future. And that comes down to basic leadership. And if you were going to imagine the kind of leadership you need to take the Pentagon forward, I have a lot of respect for Secretary Austin's experience in service, his bravery and all of that, but he's not the man that's going to be able to the guy that was 45 years in the Army and served in the Middle East is not the man that's going to reinvent our military and transform it to be able to fight the next generation of warfare. And so in all things, it comes down to leadership. We don't have the leadership with President Biden. We don't have the leadership with Senator Casey, who has been weak on all of these issues, and I don't think we have the right leadership in the Pentagon. And we're going to fail without the right leadership. And so that's why this election is so important, because we need to replace those folks and restore American leadership in the world.
Thanks. Agreed. Yes. So we have Army, Navy, Air Force represented on stage. Senator Graham, sort of staying in Asia, going to Southeast Asia, people forget that just a few short years ago, we basically flushed 20 years of Afghanistan down the toilet. We watched the Taliban take over Kabul. We watched the most disastrous and chaotic withdrawal that saw 13 of our best young men and women killed from an ISIS terror attack. And here we are now, 3 years later, and I'm not going to let everybody forget about Afghanistan. They want to push it under the rug, but we're not going to let that happen. And here we are 3 years later. ISIS Khorasan has a foothold in every single province in Afghanistan, and the Taliban is stoning women in the street who want to go to school. How does all of that, how does the fall of Kabul to the Taliban and the reemergence of ISIS, how is that affecting us today, and what are you most concerned about?
Well, where's the chart? Can somebody bring me the chart? Oh, right behind me?
Right behind you.
Okay.
I didn't know we had visual aids today.
Chart.
You came ready.
This was a question I asked the FBI director. He said, post-October 7th, you've seen a veritable rogues gallery of terrorist organizations calling for attacks against us. The threat level has gone to a whole other level since October the 7th. I see blinking lights everywhere I turn. October the 7th was the attack on Israel. I think the withdrawal of Afghanistan set in motion everything we're talking about. I think Putin saw his chance. Isn't it kind of odd he didn't invade against Trump? Isn't it kind of odd they didn't invade it? Biden and Obama have been weak in the eyes of our enemies. So Morgan, when we pulled the plug on Afghanistan, everybody else said, aha. So I think Putin went in because he saw an opportunity to go in, right? What does it mean to you? The rise of ISIS and Al-Qaeda back in Afghanistan is a perfect storm to attack us. The border is broken. Terrorism's on the rise. I've never seen more threats to our country than I do right now. The lights are blinking. It started with Afghanistan. So you got to understand, does Putin, will he stop in Ukraine? If you believe him, the answer is no. We're going to get in a war between Russia and NATO. Why did I vote to help Ukraine? I'd rather have the Ukrainians fight the Russians than us. I'd like to stop it in Ukraine before it gets to a NATO nation, and we're involved, right? They're fighting like tigers. They just need the weapons. China, if you pull the plug on Ukraine, there goes Taiwan. If you don't believe that, you're just naive. The Chinese are watching everything we're doing. So if we're not tough now, we're going to pay later. And the biggest mistake since 9/11 was pulling the plug on Afghanistan after all those years of fighting, after thousands of Americans had died, because keeping those bastards pinned down over there makes you safer here. And let me just end with this. You may be tired of fighting radical Islam. They're not tired of fighting you. They're going to do it either we're going to fight them in our backyard or theirs. I picked their backyard. I picked to have allies and not do it by ourselves. So who wants to marry up with America after Afghanistan? And if you pull the plug on Ukraine when they're asking for no troops, just weapons, then there goes Taiwan and this world blows up like you've never seen. So, Dave, you know why I'm glad you're running? You know what the world's about. He's an 82nd Airborne guy. He jumps out of perfectly good planes. Why he does that, I don't know. I'm an Air Force guy. But he's a West Point graduate. He's fought in Iraq. He's a military guy. He understands the enemy. And I'll close with it. What does the Ayatollah want? To kill all the Jews. He's a religious Nazi. He wants to purify Islam, go after the Sunnis, destroy the Jewish state, and come after us, the great Satan. What does Putin want? The old Russian Empire back. Whether you believe it or not, that's what he's trying to do. What does China want? They want to dominate the world in their own way. So what we do in the coming months, years, will determine what your children and grandchildren, the world they live in. Why am I here? Because I see in Dave a guy that gets it. If you're in the Biden administration, you clearly don't get it.
Well, thank you. You know, Pam, when we talk about the threat of terrorism to the United States. You know, there's so much news going on around the world, and we have the graphic that Senator Graham just showed. It's on display here. You could see it on the way out. When we see the FBI director say that he's worried about a terrorist attack on the homeland, that the lights are blinking, and by the way, he's testified about this multiple times, more than once, I think that we have to be concerned about our southern border. We have to be concerned. Thank you. And our northern border, all of our borders. The number changes so frequently that I don't know if I'm giving the latest number, but I think we're over 300 terrorists on the FBI's terror watch list that we've caught. As Senator Graham has said before, these are the stupid terrorists that got caught, people that were, so we don't even know, in the millions that have come over the gotaways, we don't know. So there's so much to tackle on the border, but I'm specifically curious, Pam, especially with all of your experience with law enforcement, how concerned are you about a terrorist getting over the southern border, and what should we be doing to stop this, to shut this down?
They're here. Don't you agree? They're here. They've been flowing across our border. They're here. And Morgan, that was rhetorical on your part because you know they're here. Morgan's been to the border, going back to the border multiple times. You know, one morning, it was early in the morning, and President Trump usually doesn't make early morning phone calls. He called me, and it was right when our border was wide open. Remember that? And all those military-aged men, not women and children, were walking right through our border. He called me one morning, and it wasn't, oh, my beautiful wall. It was, oh, Pam, what about the drugs coming in? What about the trafficking of kids? What about the gangs? He gets it. He recognized it. Yeah, this gentleman just said they don't get it, and I don't know how they don't. I don't know how they don't, but yeah, the terrorists are here. They're in our country. That's why. Thank you for fighting for our country in every way you have, and now in a different way. Thank you so much for being in the battle for us. But it's got to be people who understand and who see what's happening, because we have got to immediately shut down the border. You know, as a state prosecutor and as a state AG, the fentanyl has always been coming through Mexico, but they were catching it more because it was made in China, this junk. They send it to Mexico, and it's coming across the border, and now it is flowing in, and they're bringing it in with these kids, with these young women who they're trafficking. I've been to Mexico on human trafficking when I was AG and saw it firsthand what they're doing in Mexico. And the gangs coming in, and now the terrorists from every country, they're just flying to Mexico and walking right through our borders. So we have got to immediately shut down the border. And so, Senator Graham, thank you for fighting for us. And Morgan, thank you for fighting for us every day, because it's affecting all of our kids, all of our families throughout this country. It's not just international, it's domestic now, what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, you know, we have the Secretary of State is actually in China right now. So he went a year ago, and so many of us, me, Pam, Senator Graham, and others, we were on television screaming, saying, whenever you go to China, you have got to bring up fentanyl. The chemical precursors to fentanyl are made in China. And we had a really damning report that came out last week from the China Committee in the House of Representatives. And that report basically said, not only do does the Chinese government know about the chemical precursors, they aid it, they support it, they've given incentives to businesses, so they know how to shut it. Not only do they know how to shut it down if they wanted to, they know what they're doing. So a year ago, Blinken, the Secretary of State, goes to China, and he gets them, the big win that they had on fentanyl, is he gets them to have a working group, to have a sub-working group on fentanyl. He's there a year later. There's clearly been no progress, as evidenced by the China Committee's report. I want to know how this is affecting the communities in Pennsylvania, and what should the Biden administration do?
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. Everywhere I go, I ask about this. We lost 4,000 people last year in Pennsylvania from fentanyl. 4,000. We lost almost 100,000 nationally. So the scale of this crisis is unbelievable. You talk about the war on terror, the 20 years wars of Iraq and Afghanistan, we lost just more than 5,000 killed in action. 100,000 Americans last year, 4,000 Pennsylvanians. So this is an enormous issue, and I think it needs to be treated as the national security threat, and the fentanyl is destroying our communities. My hometown of Bloomsburg. I mean, you know, fentanyl comes through there, Route 80, Route 81, 76. It takes 48 to 72 hours from crossing the border to get into our communities. So I think we need to treat it as the national security threat it is. What would I do? I would go after China in the sense I'd interdict ships. I would treat this like it's nuclear plutonium. I mean, that's what it is for destroying. So I would be a much harder line on sanctioning China and holding them accountable for bringing these raw materials into Mexico. And here's a thing that I've gotten some heat for, but I think we should think about using our military against the cartels, right? This is, I mean, the technology that we've developed, the drone capability, the precision, we have unbelievable capability. We need to destroy those cartels. I saw them myself when I went to the border. You can literally see those guys up in the hedgerow sending people across. They've got a network in the United States. We need to root it out, and we need to go after those cartels across the border and destroy them, because it is a threat to our society, to our culture, to our communities, and we need to treat it like the threat that it is.
Yeah, and I want to add, I always have to say this when we talk about fentanyl. You've got to tell your grandkids, your kids, your friends, do not take anything, like a Tylenol. If someone offers you a Tylenol and you don't know them, don't take it. They are lacing everything. They have these pill presses. They are lacing everything now with fentanyl, and that's why you're hearing that these people are just dropping dead. So you've got to be so careful.
You know, Pam, just to stay with you on that, and we were just having a discussion on this, you know, when I think about national security, I, of course, think about our cops, our first responders. You work with so many sheriffs around the country, and we were just talking about the fact that, you know, the anti-cop protest really started back in 2015. It's 2024, so we have almost a decade of anti-police, anti-cop resentment in this country from so many people. And then, of course, on top of it, now they have had to deal with COVID. They've had to deal with fentanyl, and they've had to deal with the nasty, you know, riots and things against them. Now they have to deal with the university campuses and the far-left protesters who are siding with terrorist groups. So give us some insight with the sheriffs and the first responders that you work with, the cops around this country. How are they handling all of this, and what can we do to support them?
Well, and Senator Graham, you always support our law enforcement. You always have. We all have, but I mean, they're patriots. And you know, preaching to the choir here, they have to come home at night. They have spouses. You know, when I was a prosecutor, I went to every law enforcement funeral when I was Attorney General, especially. And one is too many, but we've been to way too many, and now it's just so frightening for them. I just thanked the uniformed police officer outside the door. You've got to support our men and women in blue, all of our first responders, all of our military. But they're risking their lives and going back to those college campuses. Can you imagine? I mean, they need to be out there on the subways protecting people, yet they're stuck at Columbia University in their riot gear getting spit on by these rioters every day. It's unreal what's happening to them, but they do it because they love our country just like we all love our country, and they continue to do it. But imagine being the spouse of a law enforcement officer. So many of them have young children at home too, and there's no ordinary day in the life of a law enforcement officer.
If I could just add, this is a big deal right here in Pittsburgh. We all know it. I mean, I live in Pittsburgh. I live in Squirrel Hill. In 2020, we had 1,000 police officers. Today, we have 750 on our way to 650. And it's affecting our city. You all know it. It's affecting our city. We can't, the number of patrol, I live in Squirrel Hill, right around the corner from the Tree of Life, and the number of patrols at night are about half of what they were 3 or 4 years ago. If you have a crime committed, you call in the crime to the police board. They don't come to your house unless the crime is in progress. And Philadelphia, if you can believe it, is even worse. Violent crime is at an all-time high. It's moving into the suburbs. You have this Larry Krasner, this prosecutor that has put in place a rule where if you steal less than $1,000, you don't get prosecuted. So looters and shoplifters are adding up how much they're stealing. And this is a case where it's all about, as Pam said, leadership. It's all about leadership and standing behind the men and women in blue who've worn a different uniform than we have all worn, but an equally important one to our society. And this is where my opponent, Bob Casey, has been really weak. He just recently took an endorsement from a radical defund the police movement. He's been against qualified immunity. He's essentially said the problem in our police forces are systematic racism. The men and women across Pennsylvania who are wearing the uniform, they feel it. They feel that lack of leadership, and that's part of the reason it's getting harder and harder to fill out the ranks. This is a big deal. Because if you don't have law and order in our cities, in our towns, you don't have a community. You don't have a society. And this is an area where we need strong leadership, and if I'm the senator from Pennsylvania, I will exercise it, and our new Attorney General will be a guy named Dave Sunday, who I'll work closely with, and we'll get Pennsylvania back on track. But it's a real problem today.
Senator Graham, including your active duty and reserve time, you were JAG in the Air Force. You spent 30 years in the military. Most people don't know that. 30 years in the military, it's a long time. Thank you. So just to continue on this theme, as a JAG, but also you've been a prosecutor as well, we see these DAs around the country who are not enforcing crime. What can we do to hold them accountable?
Elections matter. Okay, if you want your country to change, you need to change it. Superman's not coming. So you got to show up, you got to vote, you got to protect the ballot. I get all that. But policy matters. We had the lowest illegal crossings in December of 2020 ever. We have the highest every month because President Biden changed all the policies, remain in Mexico, all the things that worked. Why are the drug dealers coming so large? Because nobody's there to catch them. They make a lot of money. I've got to be able to make drug cartels, foreign terrorist organizations, under U.S. law so we can go after them more. So when it comes to enforcing the law, if you're in a jurisdiction, well, I guess it's one way to learn math is you learn to add, 999. The liberals want to teach math by if you steal less than 1,000, that's one way to learn to count. This is crazy. We're losing control of our streets, and one thing leads to the other. So the Attorney General of the United States needs to be strong, not weak. We need an Attorney General that will help the cops not get in their way. Local elections matter. We need people in the United States Senate who see terrorism as a threat to you and your family, that would do more than talk about the border but actually close it, that would put the cartels on their back foot. I've never seen so many threats to our country as I do right now. And I don't say that, breaks my heart to say that. And if we don't change course, we're going to pay a heavy, heavy price. The military is inadequate to the threats we face. The budget we just passed, bipartisan, by the way, was below inflation. They say we need 382 ships in the United States Navy to contend with China. Under the plan we have today, there'll be 294 in 2030. There are 293 today. We pick up one ship. We need serious people in the Senate, in the White House, all over this country making hard decisions that should have been made a long time ago. If you think the country's on the wrong track, you're right. The worst thing you could do is keep sending back the same people who got us on the wrong track.
That's great. So some of you wrote questions on cue cards when you came in. Thank you so much for your cards. I noticed that I have actually asked some of the questions that some of you wrote down, but I do want to make sure that I'm getting to your questions and we continue this conversation. But I love this question. I don't have a name on it, but thank you to whomever wrote it, and I'll address it to you, Dave McCormick. This is from the audience. Is foreign land purchasing near military bases or foreign land purchasing of U.S. farmland, is it a national security risk? And if so, how would you propose addressing it?
Yeah, I do think it is. I gave a speech here in Pittsburgh, 8 weeks ago, where I laid out a vision on how to tackle China, which really means holding China accountable for its bad behavior with COVID, its bad behavior with fentanyl, reducing our dependence on China for strategic things like semiconductors and pharmaceuticals, and not increasing our dependency with stupid things like solar panels and lithium batteries. We're making ourselves, through Biden's terrible policies, more dependent on China, and we've got to move in a way that reduces that dependency. China has, in the last decade, very aggressively started to buy farmland, big swaths of farmland, about 400,000 acres. And we need to stop that. We need to treat it, in my opinion, like the national security risk it is. I would ban the purchases of that farmland. I would ban that because I think food security, we learned during COVID some basic things. Food security is very critical. And I wouldn't want China to have the leverage on our food supply chains that comes with that. We have to treat China as the adversary it is, and that would be one of the ways to do it.
Absolutely. You know, Senator Graham, I want to quickly pick up on something that Dave just talked about because I know it's an issue that's important to you, food security. Tell our audience and those watching on the live stream a little bit more about what you're doing on food security.
Well, number one, what would you do to feed your family? A lot. I mean, you'd take $500 from the Taliban. So the best thing we can do is have people over there be able to grow food so they don't come here. And we need a strategy to help Africa that's literally starving, to come up with technology from the United States to go into Africa and develop seeds that will be drought resistant to allow people the chance to live where they were born so they don't have to migrate and create a problem. So food security is national security, right? I want to have more than one option. Rather than just killing everybody all the time, I'd like to improve the lives of others where we could. But one thing I can tell you about Hamas, if you don't get rid of every last one of them, they'll come back and they'll kill the people trying to work with Israel. But when it comes to places like Africa, China is all over the place, we're not. This guy understands it. Dave probably, as much as anybody I've met on the trail here, understands what China's up to. They're buying not just land around an Air Force base, they're buying up half of Africa. And at the end of the day, it is not in our interest for them to own the most fertile parts of the world. So we need to get on the ground in Africa and other distressed continents and say, we're here to help you. We're not here to give you debt you can't pay back. We're here to teach you to fish. The best thing we can do in this world as Americans is teach people to fish and let them buy products from us rather than China.
Pam, we have a few questions on the southern border that I'll basically summarize, but one of the major concerns about, again, the open and undefended southern border is actually how much it's harming women, the human trafficking of not just women, sadly, of teenage girls,
Kids.
the rapes. It's horrific stuff. Can you explain to us, I know you've been to the border many times, what actually we're seeing there and how how these policies are supposed to be humane and welcoming are actually really harming women?
Yeah, they are. I actually went to Mexico when I was Attorney General in a bipartisan effort, and we went and saw safe houses for victims of human trafficking. These young girls and young boys, and it's not only sex trafficking, it's domestic trafficking. I met a little girl, and we looked and we thought she was a little boy at first because her hair was little, hair cut short, clothes on. She was sold every morning on the street for labor, and her mom dressed her that way so she wouldn't get raped. But that's very real, and it's very real in Mexico. And now it's flowing into our country, and that's why we again have to shut the border. But yeah, nothing about this is pro-women. All of these young women that are being brought into our country, and all of these gangs and drug cartels that are coming into our country, they're prostituting these women. And that's human trafficking, and they're drugging them. They're kidnapped in essence, and it's horrific. And I think the numbers are going to be higher than ever because our borders are wide open.
Yeah, if we just sat in this room together on the first day of the Biden administration, we could never have imagined and said, how bad could the border get? We would have never imagined it could get this bad, right? Never imagined. And all the argument that the Biden administration meant early on about the humanitarian cost, what has been done, the actual implications of the policy have been so horribly inhumane. The human trafficking, the human suffering has been off the charts. Economically, it's been disastrous. National security, we talked about. Fentanyl. It's been a failed policy on so many different levels. We'll look back on this and say this of many strategic miscalculations, this was one of the worst. But you have to ask yourself, why? Why is the Biden administration going down this path, right? Why is this going down the path? It's raw politics, raw politics. So first, don't think that those 10 million illegal migrants have entered our country. Don't think that the vision isn't that they become legal voters, right? That is certainly the intention, that they become legal voters. But more than that, something that didn't get enough attention, in my opinion, was the fact that all the Democrats in the Senate, including Bob Casey, my opponent, voted to ensure that those illegal immigrants are included in the census. This is so important. I want you all to hear this because it's so important, as Senator Graham knows better than anybody, because the census, 10 million new people in the census, determines which states get congressional seats, right? And congressional seats determine electoral college votes. So this is a huge thing. If you want to talk about how democracy gets fundamentally hijacked, this is the way it happens. And it's disgraceful and it's cynical, but that's what's happening. That's why the policies that are so obvious to us that are failing are being put in place. It's because there's a political objective behind it. Joe Biden's been spearheading the effort, and Bob Casey's been with him every step of the way.
We have another question that was written by the audience that I think is perfect for you, Dave, and for Senator Graham. This is a really smart question, but basically this person asks, when does the national debt and the devaluation of the dollar, of our currency, become a national security threat?
I think we're there, man. I think we're there, right? When anytime, let's just call it, anytime the interest payment on your debt exceeds your defense budget, right? Red flag. That's a red flag. What's happened, and I think Senator Graham will agree with me on this, our inability to control our cost under Republicans and Democrats alike have gone like this. I mean, it's 20 years of too much spending, living beyond our means. But what's happened under Joe Biden's a hockey stick. It has gone like this. It's the primary driver of our inflation, and it's putting us at true risk. This debt, particularly as interest rates have gone up, is absolutely not sustainable. We have to make dramatic changes in the way we manage our economy to fix it. I'm going to say something that may seem contradictory. It's not. If you had $100 to invest, you'd still invest it in America because we're the best, most dynamic economy in the world. We can fix this with the right leadership in place. We can turn things around, but we're on an unsustainable path where right now, every person in America, including our kids, has more than $100,000 of debt on their shoulders. So we cannot sustain this, but we can fix this. But it depends on what you do. As Senator Graham said, this is about choices. If we make the wrong choice and continue down this path, we're going to lose our country. But if we get the right leadership in place, we can turn this around with smart pro-growth policies, most notably unlocking our energy sector here in Pennsylvania and around the country. That would be the first thing I'd do to reduce the debt.
Senator Graham, my only thought is nobody at the Federal Reserve or in the White House must do the grocery shopping in their family. Because I don't know about you guys, but it was like summer of 21, fall of 21, I went to Publix, which is not, unfortunately for you guys, y'all don't have Publix in the Northeast. But in Tennessee, where I live, we have a Publix. And I checked out at Publix and I looked at my receipt and I went, what did I just buy? Right? And now we've got families, Senator Graham, I'm sure in Pennsylvania and in South Carolina, that are making really hard choices of, do I go to the gas station and fill up my car full of gas, a full tank of gas, or do I go in the grocery store and get a full cart of groceries for my babies?
Well, when you go to so here's the new joke, Biden's America, you have to mortgage your house to fill up your car. And you're probably going to get robbed at the gas station. So we need to break that cycle. So energy prices could be substantially lower if we went after the oil and gas we own. Yeah, wind, solar, nuclear, all good. Oil and gas is very important to us as a nation. I am sure that if we get a new president, they will unleash the energy we own all throughout the country, particularly here in Pennsylvania. So by locking down drilling for oil and gas we own, we make Russia stronger. This is insane. The best thing you could ever do for Russia is stop exporting natural gas from America, a friend, to our European allies so they're stuck with the Russian gas. I mean, if you really wanted to hurt Putin, increase your energy supply. Inflation. The regulatory state has a price tag to it. If you're in a restaurant business now, it's really hard. I mean, the price of groceries are really, climate change, whether you believe it's real or not, the approach they're taking is destroying the economy. And get rid of all the cows because they're fart. I mean, these people are nuts. So the bottom line is policy matters, if you had a rational energy policy that protected the environment but made us independent of foreign influences. My goal is to have to produce oil and gas so we don't have to buy it from people who hate our guts. And on the farm side, unleash the farmer, allow us to access the land, let us be more independent here. If you can't feed yourself, you can't clothe yourself, and you can't provide energy to your economy, you're in a desperate situation.
Dave, I feel like you got to follow up on that from the Pennsylvania energy perspective.
Yeah, I mean, two things. First of all, Pennsylvania has 53,000 farms. It's the biggest industry we have in Pennsylvania. We are a huge provider to the entire country on food security and food supply. And one of the things that sustained that has been a lot of these farms have found natural gas on their farms. I was talking to Toby Rice recently, who's EQT CEO, which is the biggest natural gas producer in the country. He said to me the following: we have the fourth largest natural gas reserves in the world. If you think about Saudi Arabia pumps 10 million barrels a day. We have Saudi Arabia underneath our feet in terms of natural gas reserves, that much. It's enormous, and we could export it to the world with the right permitting reform, the right litigation reform, so we could actually drill, ship it, or have an offshore port where we could send it to Europe and other places. And this is so incredibly good for our national security, because to be an energy superpower, we give the natural gas to our allies. We don't have them get natural gas from Russia. It's incredible for our economy. These jobs for 19, 20-year-old kids, 65, 70,000 a year, plus 20,000 a year overtime. These are great jobs that can last for decades to come. And finally, as Senator Graham said, it's great for our environment, because by exporting that clean, beautiful natural gas from right underneath our feet, we displace coal-fired plants in places like India and China. So this is one of those things we're going to look back, and I'll say a final point, I said before, but I still can't believe how dumb it is. In this whole thing, $6 trillion, transforming our economy to be more dependent on solar and EVs. By the way, I'm for all energy. I'm not opposed to those. I just don't want to subsidize them with billions of dollars. In all that, we have made ourselves dependent on China for lithium batteries and solar panels. This economy Biden wants, China has this in their hands, and that is a complete disaster. We fundamentally have to change our energy policy for Pennsylvania and America, and when I'm senator and President Trump's in the White House, we're going to make big changes.
I want to ask all of you a question, and I'll start with Pam, and hopefully you all can have a different creative answer. But you are very close with President Trump. You have worked with him for many years and spent a lot of time with him. From a policy perspective, which national security related policy did you think that he got the most correct, and which policy isn't, and what would you have him pursue if he is president again?
Oh goodness, everything he did. Go back to what he did. He's going to have executive orders ready on day one to reverse. Start with the Keystone Pipeline. Yeah. Look at the Keystone Pipeline. I mean, that's national security, what you just said, Dave, right? I mean, everything, shutting our border down, I think that's going to be the number one issue in my mind right now from a state perspective.
Senator Graham, which national security policy was your favorite in the Trump administration?
I think he made our enemies afraid of him and our allies feel like America was a good bet.
Dave, what about you?
Well, I think one of the things we'll look back on was the transformation that took place in the Middle East. And the Abraham Accords, which President Trump oversaw, came under his leadership. Morgan was involved. My wife, Dina, was involved. That was, if we'd have started at the first day of the Trump administration and said, could we imagine that could have ever happened in the best way possible? I think few people would have imagined that level of leadership transformation that, will, if we can continue on the path, not let October 7th disrupt it. It's disrupted it, but not let it stop it. I think that we'll look back on that and say that is one of those over decades, one of the most transformational things in foreign policy. And it sometimes foreign policy is when things don't happen, it's the absence of imagination, and sometimes when remarkable things do happen, it's the evidence of imagination. And that was a case where leadership and imagination came together to do something truly transformational.
Yes. It was certainly a privilege to work on Abraham Accords, but you just mentioned your wife. I have to say, she was President Trump's Deputy National Security Advisor and one of the smartest and kindest women I have ever worked with. An amazing power couple for sure. I would call her a mentor of mine, but I think she'd get mad at me because she's not that much older than me. So a very good sister, older sister. So we'll also end with one final question to all of you. We'll start with you, Senator Graham. What around the world, which country or which issue concerns you the most? And then also, where do you see hope?
I see hope in the people of the United States who are better than their government. I see what keeps me up at night is if the Ayatollah, who's a religious Nazi, ever acquired a nuclear weapon, he would use it, the Arabs would get their own, and we'd be on the road to Armageddon. When Trump killed Soleimani, he set everything back in the right place. Iran was in a box. They're running wild. They have more money than they've ever had. They're dismembering the Mideast. So my biggest fear, and there's a lot to worry about, is Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon that would destroy the state of Israel if they could. And Israel will not let that happen. And I want Israel to know that we do have your back.
Pam?
Well, certainly all of these countries with who are not our friends. But right now, domestically, Mexico, because of the border, they're not cooperating. You think they'd be doing this under Donald Trump? Not in a million years. But of course, China, all of these countries that aren't our enemies. But this might sound funny, but I actually have faith in our election process this year and next year. We have to. And that's why we're all here. That's why we're all doing what we're doing. And that's why I think you're in the audience. I mean, we have to have faith. We have to get out there and support the process, the voting process in our country. If we don't, they're going to win every time. So we can't just sit home. We have to get out there and believe in our system and believe that good will prevail.
Dave. I've got a huge faith in America. I believe in my heart the greatest country in the history of the world, and yet I believe we're in trouble, and that leadership is the path out. And the thing I worry about most is we see what's going on these campuses, and I'm confident we can deal with China or the Middle East or any of these challenges abroad if we have the right leadership and the right orientation that people believe in themselves and believe in America. And I think when I see these kids on the campus who don't know the difference between right and wrong, good and evil, and you say, my God, how could that happen? And you watch those hearings and you see those 3 college presidents, you say, oh, that's how it happened. The lack of leadership, the lack of moral clarity. So I'm worried about that. And I think that's what this election's about, is the fight for leadership and moral clarity. And I think with the right leadership and moral clarity, there's no problem abroad that we won't overcome. And if we don't engage and make the right choices, I think we're going to look back on ourselves and say this was the moment that we lost America. And so that's why this election's so important. Stakes couldn't be higher. We can deal with anything. America is uniquely resilient as long as we get the right people in place who believe in America and get us moving in the right direction. And that's why it's so good to be with 3 great Americans who are serving their country in amazing ways. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Dave. I want to thank everybody from Pittsburgh. What an awesome city. Thank you for coming out today. Thank you to everybody who's watching online. You can go to polaris-us.org to find out more. We'll be in Detroit next Friday with Mike Rogers. We'll be in Nevada. We'll be at the convention. We'll be at the border. We're all over the country having these important national security discussions. Thank you so much for tuning in at home. Thank you for being here. God bless you, and God bless America.
Thank you. Thank you, Polaris.
Thank you, Morgan.